Welcome to the elementary classroom. This presentation will be broken up into several different mini presentations that address some of the practicalities of not only managing the space but thinking about safety, supplies, rules and expectations, and instructional techniques for the elementary classroom. Some suggestions will be made, and I invite you to think about how these ideas can fit into your classroom and what types of things resonate with you, thinking ahead to your own room. I want to start with managing the space. When we think about the elementary classroom, we need to think about how students can be invited to the learning process. We are in control of the space whether we accept it or not, and a lot of times, most of the time in fact, we don't get to pick our space. Some of us might not even end up with a dedicated art room. Doesn't mean our students are going to have a lower quality art experience as long as we take control of the space. Now, here are some things I want you to think about. What should an art classroom look like? Think about everything from the furniture you've seen in classrooms, the tables, the chairs, to what types of storage exist, to which way do you want students facing? Where are you going to put things? Are you going to have things on the table? What kinds of colors exist in your room? How many posters do you have up in your room? Is there anything hanging from the ceiling? Where does the technology exist in your room? Is there a place for student work to be displayed? There's lots of things to think about, as well as the transience of your room, and by that I mean, do you have places or display boards where things can be switched out, where students can continually be exposed to new ideas, new visuals, and things like that? Will you have a place to conduct critiques with students? Will you have a place to interact with students besides them sitting down at their tables? All of these things will become part of how you are instructing your students and part of how they experience art. And as you know, we believe art is a really important piece of a student's school day, and we need to make it the best that we can. The other thing I want you to think about is how a space can accommodate creativity. The examples you see here were created by elementary generalist teachers, and their goal was to create an elementary classroom. Now, granted, they weren't thinking about an art-specific classroom, but they were thinking along the same lines of how can I create a space that allows for creativity and is inviting for students. And you can see some really interesting pieces to these students' rooms, everything from varied colors, different posters, a stage in one corner, a reading space in one corner. I mean, I think there's a lot of things to think about as you start to envision your ideal classroom. And the unique thing is that I think while we all have similar ideas and similar theories about how we want our students to experience learning and art, we don't all have that manifest the same way, which is okay. And I think that's great that we all encounter these ideas a little bit differently. And all of these spaces have the potential to invite in imagination and creativity. Now, as you're building your model, it's going to be really important that you think about proportions and color and space, basically. I mean, everything from the furniture to the walls to the negative space around it. I think there's lots to consider as you move forward in that process. In terms of what should an elementary classroom feel like? The space has so much to do with that, and the theories behind it, behind these core beliefs, there's a set of best practices that exist. And while the things listed on this particular slide have more to do with behavior, it has a lot to do with space as well. And behavior is influenced by space and how well students feel in that space. Madeline Hunter, a curriculum theorist, said kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. And if we aren't comfortable in our space and if we don't feel in control, the students are going to know that and they're going to feel that. A few tips. You want to make sure and call kids by name. You want to stand at the door. You want to be part of their lives outside of the classroom as well as inside of the classroom. We want our space to feel safe and insular at times, but we also want students to feel like they can readily make connections to the outside world with the things that they're learning in our classroom. Self-control is really important. We're trying to teach students to have self-control, especially at the elementary level, but it's also important for you as a teacher to have self-control. You want to stay calm even when they're not. You have to remember that you're the adult in the room and you have to model what you want them to be. You want to model tenderness and appropriateness even when things around you are not that. You want to give your students ground rules. Don't assume that they know what you want or expect. You have to teach that just like you have to teach drawing or proper cutting or proper gluing. You have to teach them how to follow the rules the way you want, and you practice it. You model it for them, but you also give them a chance to succeed by practicing those routines. You want to give unconditional positive regard. No matter what they've done or said, you still need to show that you like them. Even though it feels like pretending sometimes, you need to make sure that they can still depend on you. So in thinking about all of those ideas and those behavioral kinds of aspects, what kinds of things or colors or words could make that possible that could be part of your space? Another thing to consider as it comes to space and creating this really well-oiled machine of a classroom, this organized area, is the planning aspect of it, and that comes into the lesson planning. And you know already that when you plan your lessons, you're thinking about planning the space as well as planning the ideas. So a really important to think about is a failure to plan is planning to fail. You're not giving yourself or your students a chance to do as well as you could and as they could. You have to advocate for your space as well as yourself. You won't always have an ideal classroom, so you have to plan to make it what you need. If the chairs are one way one day, but you need them to be in a different way, then you move them. You need to be in control of it. If you're doing a presentation and you need the lights off, turn the lights off. Don't just do something because it's easy, and don't do something just because that's the way it's been done before. Make cognizant, important, effective decisions for you and your students and allow that to guide the learning. Have a reason and a rationale behind what you do. You want to develop and maintain something like a teacher almanac. This is more than a portfolio. This is a record of everything you do. So the lessons you teach, the ideas you have, images you find, worksheets you find or you use. This is basically your curriculum, plus all this other stuff you think about and you find. You want to keep regular notes about what worked and what didn't work. Because even though you think you will remember, you won't. Every day is going to be different when you teach, which is one of the amazing parts of being a teacher. And so you want to track yourself so you can go back in your notes and say, oh yeah, that worked really well that time. So what worked about it? And then take a few notes. So make sure that you're setting yourself up to be everything that you can be. And it sounds kind of silly, but you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the chance to do what you can. You've learned a lot in your teacher education program, and the less you reinvent the wheel, the better. Lesson plans are written goals, basically. We've talked about the importance of the rationale behind lesson plans. You want to write them down to make them happen. If you don't write it down, it's not necessarily going to happen. Don't think that I'll remember what I'll want to say or do next. I don't need to write that down. Well, I always do this, so I don't need to write that down. Give yourself a chance to succeed. And you do that by planning, even though it feels inane and detailed and ridiculous. And I already wrote this down. Why do I need to write it down again? It's because the more you plan, the more ready you'll be to stand up there and do your thing. And the more ready you are to be yourself.